That's a little close. I may not be able to stand for the whole thing. Well, hi. Well, I've ate. I don't really want to talk now. I thought we'd put this off till later. My name's Danny. I'm an alcoholic. Glad to be here. I've really enjoyed myself, and I loved your talk. It was just absolutely one of the best I've ever heard. And I'm glad I've got to spend time with some of my favorite people, Bob and Scott, and Steve, of course, is hosting me. And Steve and I are really good. Actually, I hate to tell you this, but I am. I'm just going to say it. I never ever have said it in public. But Steve's my sponsor, and he's awfully young in sobriety. I've had the gift of sobriety since February the 18th of '81, and I'm really grateful for that. I really am. As I was listening to Harold talk, I think the gift that I got out of it was just that I was able to identify with so much of what he said and where he'd been and how you feel, and the fact that I'm still here, and and it's been quite a journey for me. It really has. I belong to the Cypress Wood group of that meets in the Alano Club in Spring, Texas, and it's a good group. It really is. It's not a group that spends most of its time sitting preaching to each other. They get out and do things. And recently, I followed suit with some of you guys, and I have started a group that meets in a home, and the guys I sponsor and the guys that they sponsor, and we're all there because we want to add to our lives and to sobriety, and I want these guys to experience what I've experienced, which has been just an absolutely wonderful life. And I thought I've always liked my joke that I tell that kind of loosens me up, but after hearing Harold's, I don't like mine anymore. And it's too soon to steal it, so I will take it. I'll have to clean it up a little bit. It's kind of like my hamburger story that Steve uses as a cheeseburger. And but Steve and I were talking earlier, this is most everything that I have to say, I just heard somebody say it, and I've remembered it, and it's impacted me. I think AA is kind of a society of plagiarists. We tell you, we tell you, you say it 3 times. 3 times you got to say that Danny said it, although I probably didn't. You just heard me say it, and then after that, you can just start saying it the way you like to. And, before long in your group, they'll think, man, I sure like to hear that guy talk. We hadn't said anything original in a long time. I'm married to a really, really nice lady, and I have to thank Steve that I'm still married to a really nice lady, because she's not married to a really, really smart guy. And I've always wanted to be married. I've always wanted to stay and be, just be a regular Joe that had a house and dogs and, the family. And but it wasn't long into doing this that I realized that there's a lot more to it than you see on TV. And, just because you make a good talk in AA, that doesn't really translate into being a good husband at all. So there was a lot to learn. There's a lot I'd like to say, and I guess I'm going to get an opportunity to tell you some of the things that I rarely talk about from the podium tomorrow. Tonight, I'm just going to tell you the same thing I tell all the time, and I tell it because it's pretty much in a general way, it's just kind of the way my life ran, and I tell some stories that may not even be necessary to tell, but they take up time, and I think they're funny, and. I wouldn't want to lose part of my hour, I heard in Alcoholics Anonymous that you never ever have to be alone again unless you speak longer than an hour. I did do a 71-minute talk, and I had that taper just doing that, you know, and I don't even know what I was talking about. I don't know that much, you know, but I do. I'm gonna ramble a minute because my dinner's settling, you know, and I do like going to the prisons. I mean, it's just, and I don't go to the jails as much. I go to the jail some. For me, there's a distinction. But I go to the Texas Department of Corrections, and it's just it's the strangest feeling to me every time I go in, because I spent so many years in there, and just getting in and getting out and going by places. You know, this is the same places that I was in, and it's a bizarre feeling. But when you go in there and you sit down and you've got all these guys that are gathered up, and you know, some of them are getting their cards punched, and some of them are just, you know, they want to get out because they're in gangs, and this is an opportunity to meet and exchange ideas that are not helpful and not going to further AA's cause. But they're in there with all those guys. There's a guy or two, and they're there, and they don't know how they got there. They don't know how they're ever going to get out of there. And if they do get out, they don't think there's ever going to be a chance for them. And those are the guys that I really love to see. And they're in every group, and so I try not to miss. I go twice a month to the Ramsey unit, and I usually go once a month out to the Huntsville unit, and I did time in both of those. I might as well tell my joke. It's not as good as his, but it's longer. And it doesn't have anything to do with recovery. It's not but there was a lady that walked in to a pharmacy, and she goes up to the pharmacist and said, "I'd like to buy some arsenic." And he said, "Well, what for?" And she said, "Well, I'm going to kill my husband." He said, "Ma'am, you can't walk in here and say something like that. They'll put us both in jail." And she reached in her purse and pulled out a picture of his wife and her husband in bed together. He looked at it and he said, "Well, that's different. I didn't know you had a prescription." Yeah. I had several false starts in Alcoholics Anonymous. I haven't been around Date. You know, you ever talk to somebody, you come in and you talk to a guy that, you know, I don't know how y'all are, but in Texas we really like to qualify each other. We need to know who's got the most seniority here. And you'll go up and talk to a guy for a minute, and you get around to answering the question, you know, and that's, "How long you been sober?" And you'll hear guys like me would say, "Well, you know, I've been sober this time for like 6 weeks, but I've been around since 1942, you know." I want you to know that you're not talking to a new guy here. Just because I'm drinking, that ain't got, you know, I know about the program, you know. And all of a sudden, it looked to me like that place parted like the Red Sea. And here come this little short, dour-looking fellow with a flat top, and he had a young guy behind him. He's headed right straight for me. I saw him, and I thought, oh, hell no, I ain't going anywhere. I ain't going anywhere with him. And he walked up to me, and he said, "Welcome to Alcoholics Anonymous. We're going to Baskin-Robbins for ice cream. Would you like to go?" And I thought in my head, "Be still my beating heart. Baskin-Robbins for ice cream. There is no way on God's green earth that I'm going to go off with a bunch of geriatrics for ice cream while my wife is out with her boyfriend. That ain't going to happen." And, but, you know, typical of me, what came out of my mouth was, "Sure, I'd love to go." And so, you know, and you know you make a mistake right away because you get in the car, you don't have your car, you know. I don't know, you can tell if there's a bunch of new people around because you'll invite everybody to coffee and there'll be 14 cars go over to, you know, across the street. And man, I mean, I'm off out there, I don't have a car, and, you know, with these guys, and they're talking about not drinking, and we're going for ice cream. This is not looking good. And, you know, I stood over there, and I guess I kind of glazed over because they began to grow weary of trying to tell me that if you don't drink, you won't get drunk, and how much trouble they've been in, which I thought was, why would you want to tell me all this stuff? And finally, this one kid said, well, let me explain it to him. He said, look, it's not the caboose that kills you, it's the locomotive. And I thought, I should have brought pencil and paper. I'm sure that's very helpful, but right now I'm a very busy person. I got a lot of things to tend to, right, you know. And you know, and we are busy. And do you know another thing is, you know how we don't, when you talk to a new guy, certainly when me, you'd ask them, where do you live? And we don't live places, we stay places. Yeah. Well, I'm staying over here, you know, with my mama, you know. I really felt it when Harold said that he broke it off with his mom, broke it off with him. I thought, oh, I don't know if I could have survived that long. Because, man, I'll tell you what, I could drive my mother like a new Cadillac. And I did. But I'll tell you a little bit about how I wound up in those desperate straits. I was, you know, I was born in '45. My mom and dad were married on Valentine's Day, 1944. And she was 14, and he was 19. They had me when she was 15 years old. And my dad was in the Navy, and he went off to fought in the Battle of Okinawa. And, you know, when he came back home, well, he had some issues, you know, that associated with being in the war. And we living down South Texas, and he would work hard and drink hard, and, you know, sometimes some of that stuff would come out sideways, and he wouldn't be too much fun to be around. But most of the time, I just loved being around him because he was a big, gregarious guy that just, you know, I loved him. He was just awesome. And I was just a little guy. And I had a memory of him, and I never really knew why that would stand out in my mind, but I had a memory of him when I was very young, of him drinking those long neck beers and listening to that Hank Williams music, and just, you know, big guy, just throwing me up in the air and catching me. And I remember him catching me and just holding my head to his bare chest and patting my head, and me feeling on a visceral level that I'm safe, that this is the place that I belong, nothing can go wrong. I'm with my dad. And my mom kind of, she just couldn't take his drinking, and so she really began to harp on that. And he quit drinking, and he turned all of his energy to work. And he literally, I'm telling you, he just abandoned the family in place. He started working really hard, but he quit interacting. He no longer would come out to play. I suppose that if he'd been allowed to drink long enough, he'd probably wound up alcoholic. But he became a workaholic. He didn't have anything to say, and my mother, everything my mother said was, don't do this, don't do that. Everything could hurt you, you know. So I walked around looking at life as very threatening. And I didn't really understand what was going on. So as I grew up, I have two younger brothers. I just grew up with, you know, deciding by myself what was true and what was false. And turns out that that's a very, very bizarre way to live, but it seemed real to me. I couldn't distinguish the true from the false before I ever took a drink. And I guess I was in middle school, about 12 years old, and I mean, I'm just about to implode because I'm withdrawn. I don't have friends. It's not that no one wants me for a friend. I just don't know what to say to them. I don't like to play sports because I'm not good at it. I don't want to do anything that I'm not good at, and I can't do anything because I've never learned. You can't just be good at it without ever doing it. So I just stand around and look cool. And I went to school this day, and they played this film called Duck and Cover. And man, I'm telling you, I sat and watched that. And this is a film where what they would show you what to do in case a nuclear bomb goes off in your neighborhood. And, you know, and I watched that, and it's, you know, the big mushroom cloud and the buildings fall over, and all the little kids get up and imitate this turtle, and they get up and they take their big books and go out into the hallway, and they duck down and put the book over their head. And I thought, well, I'm not their best student, but I knew that was woefully inadequate, you know. Man, I left that school that day. Everybody else left. They're going to go play, go play Little League or, get a girlfriend, have a band, do something. Not me, man. I'm on high alert. I'm concerned about national security. And, and something I just want to tell this because I don't think I've ever really told it, but in that same 2 or 3 week period, I'm walking home from school. And I'm with a friend of mine, and all of a sudden we hear this big pop overhead, and there's a twin-engine Cessna and a T-31 or 33 jet trainer from Webb Air Force Base just collided overhead. And all of the bodies just fell all around us. I mean, the engines, everything. I mean, I had a trash can lid, old metal trash can lid, thinking I would keep the plane off of me anyway. And I'm telling you, that was it for me. Life was way too threatening, and I just had a complete meltdown. I started running away from home. They would catch me and bring me back. They couldn't keep me in school. I started lying, stealing, breaking into places. And, my folks said, man, I don't know what's wrong with him, but finally they put me in Big Spring State Hospital, and I stayed there for a 90-day stay and we had a little psychotherapy, and they hand you your little bottle of pills, but psychotropic drugs, and you come home and they tried to put me back in school, and I don't do good. I'm just like I was. And I'm not taking those pills or anything. And one day I borrowed my mother's car. Actually, I stole it. And I went down to where the cool kids hang out. It's not like I live in a much bigger city than you. It was Odessa. And we didn't go around the courthouse. We went around Roy's and Dave's restaurant, just drove around in circles. And I went down there where the older guys were that I really wanted to fit in with. I wanted to be like. And I went down there and I tried to imitate them. I was in my mother's station wagon. It was a green station wagon, which wasn't cool at all. And I had on a white T-shirt like you're supposed to wear, and I had cigarettes rolled up in my sleeve. I don't smoke, but that's what everybody does. And I've got real skinny arms at the time, and so when I got there and I got out of the car, and my cigarettes unrolled because and it's just, you can see it's not going good because the other guy's got a lowered '58 Chevy, and his nickname's Batman, and I just think I got to go, I can't stay here, and they spotted me and started making fun and got me to smoke a cigarette, and they give me a drink, and pretty soon that magic happens. And for the first time that I could ever remember, I didn't feel afraid. I didn't care what you thought. I just was in the zone. I was having a great time. And I don't know, I blacked out that night. I also know that I wrecked the car. I must have puked on myself. I hope it was me. And I got my nose broke, everything. I got arrested, brought home to my parents, and everything that could go wrong, short of dying, went wrong. And, the next morning I woke up and I got a terrible hangover, and my folks, I could hear them in there talking. They want me to go back to hospital. And, the only thing I know is I ain't drinking with those guys ever again, because they got, because they're troublemakers, but I knew I would drink again. They sent me to that hospital, and I was in that hospital. I tried to escape immediately, and they arrested me, brought me back, and they put me on Thorazine. So when you do Thorazine, what happens if they give you too much, you just sleep all the time. But they give you just the right amount, you can think, but you can't go. And so you just sit around planning your escape. But you can't really, you can't get into action, And it's just, but eventually they think you comply, so they took me off of it, and now they have me, my job is to help with the guys that they give shock treatments to. Back then, they just capture you and hold you down and put 2 electrodes on you, and you roll old Sparky. And it was, you come out, it was pretty scary. And they told me, he said, if you try to run, we're going to do that to you. So I'm just going to stay here with you. And I made 2 friends that were in there. They were, they're slightly older than me, and they were getting shock treatments. And, you know, in between their treatments, we'd try to bond. We'd weave baskets and stuff, you know, be buddies. But, you know, the longer that we were here, these guys getting shock treatments, they began to forget that we even knew each other. So on a visitor's day, I stole a car. A lady had come to visit her son, and I stole her car and broke those two guys out. It wasn't really that hard. I mean, it sounds like it's really kind of clever, but it wasn't. They just were lazy, you know, attendants, and we just wandered out. And we took that lady's car, and we took off and made it over to from the Big Springs to Midland, which is about 40 miles. And we picked up two more guys who should have been in that hospital. And we're heading south. We're going to head south to Mexico, which is about 230 or 40 miles from Midland. And, you know, this turns out to be the most exciting time of my life. I mean, this is my first gang. I'm their leader. You know, you know, the police are after us. My folks are looking for us. The hospital's after us, you know, in a stolen car. It just doesn't get much better than that. And, you know, we're heading south, and you know, the way we'd get something to drink and eat, we'd just go into these mom and pop stores, and we'd go in and we'd steal booze and food, and, you know, we'd siphon gas. And you'd have to create a diversion to be able to steal anything, but when you're escaped mental patients, that's no problem. It's pretty easy, you know. And I never really think things through. More so now, but then I really didn't. I mean, everything seemed like a good idea. I thought of it. You know, I'm the kind of guy that I would shoot an arrow into the wall here, and then I'll go over and paint a bullseye around it. You know? And I back up and I think, you know, that's amazing that I actually hit the bullseye like that. And I was like that all the way up to the time I met you. You're the ones who explained to me that I had the sequence backwards, you know. Anyway, so I mean, I'm heading south, and I got, you know, ready, fire, aim is my main, you know, that's my main goal. I mean, my main, what do you call it? Whatever it is. That's what I live by, principle. But we're heading south, and, you know, we got probably halfway there, and those guys' meds began to wear off. And it became clear that they were in there for a reason. Because we would stop, and I'm telling you, it became increasingly difficult for me to gather my gang up and get them back in the car. It was like herding cats, you know. They were just, you know. So I finally got them all back in, and we got across the border, and I sold that car in Mexico, in Villacuña, Mexico, to a taxi driver for a few hundred pesos. And we made it over to what is known as the Cadillac Bar, and we're sitting in the Cadillac Bar having a drink, and this is when I realized I'm completely out of plan. You know, this is it. We're here, and I have no idea what we're going to do next. And about that time, there was this big commotion, and one of the guys that I had brought with me had like a psychotic episode, and he thought that this parrot that belonged to a girl that worked down there had said something ugly to him, so he killed it. And, well, it started a big stink. I mean, here come you know, we had a fight going, here come the local police and the federales, and I grabbed these guys and said, we've got to get out of here, and we ran for the international border, and they caught us on the Mexican side, and we went to jail in Mexico. Yeah, that's what I said. And in the book, in the big book, it says in the doctor's opinion that the alcoholic's problems pile up on him, become astonishingly difficult to solve. This is one of those instances that bore out that truth, because I'm not bilingual. I don't even know how to tell these people I want my mother. Yeah. You guys know we do that, you know. I'll tell you what, I get in trouble. I remember her number, you know. But I don't, you know, I was down there quite a while, and I don't know how she found me. I've heard her tell the story in Al-Anon. You know, she told the whole the whole thing from her perspective. And I remember when I heard it, I thought, where'd you hear that story? And she said, well, that's what happened. And I said, well, I've been telling that story for years, and that's not the way it goes. And she said, well, honey, some of your fondest memories never happened. And so I told her, I said, well, I've heard yours and mine. I like mine better. And she said, well, that also has always been one of your traits. You know, the truth does not have to intervene. Whatever you like, that works. But, you know, this much we gathered that she did get me out, and we made it back to Texas. It had a long, long ride, because she would tune that AM radio and look for Mexican music, and when she would find it, she'd turn it all the way up. And that music would just be blaring, those trumpets going, and she'd quote scripture to me and try to shame me. It was her attempt at aversion therapy. And it really worked. I still hate that music. You know. And we got back home to West Texas, and we have a family meeting, and that's where I sit and watch them talk. And, and we're sitting there, and they're talking back and forth, and my dad said, well, maybe he should just join the Navy. They'll make a man out of him. Well, I want to say, I have a bulletin for you. I'm an escaped mental patient. I just stole a car, just got out of jail in Mexico. I don't think the Navy'd be interested. But the day I turned 17, I joined the Navy. They took me, gave me a gun. And I was a CB, and to be honest with you, I'm still very patriotic. I love the military, and I think anybody in here who either has served, is serving, or has family that did. I think it's wonderful, and I enjoyed my time in there as best I could. But I had alcoholism, and alcoholism, man, it just sucks all of the life out of everything. It's like I could walk into a room and it was like I was an energy vampire. I didn't even know it, but I would just suck the life out of everything and everybody. And I just didn't know how to connect, how to have fun, how to let go or do anything. But I could take a drink, and none of that mattered, because I just was in this magic little place, The trouble is that I didn't always act the same way every time. And sometimes I black out, and sometimes I want to fight. And sometimes I want to get, I want to fall in love with your wife. And, it's just, and you're all over the place. And I began to see that, that part of this has to do with drinking tequila. I've got to quit drinking tequila, because it is almost guaranteed that I'm going to black out and get in a fight. And, and I would try to stay away from tequila and drink only beer, and then I'd drink beer and forget that tequila was a problem. And, and this is just going on all over the place. And I'm going before the captain all the time. It's called captain's mast. I'm always going in there. They want to know why I'm back. And, my stripes, if they'd had Velcro back then, that's the way they should have gone on, just because it had just been on and off, I could go in and I would work for a little while, and I'd do really good, because I'd just put my nose to the grindstone. I'd work really hard, and I'd get really focused, and I'd get my stripes back, and then 2 weeks later, I'm back before the captain. And we're just all over the place. And during the day, when I'm around these folks, I just don't want to be there. I want the day to be over. I want to go home and get some rest, and I'm not going to drink tonight. And but I'd wake up in the morning, and I would have been out all night long. I'd have a hangover, and I'd think I'm going to have another hangover. But I'd tell myself I may have to have one, but it isn't going to be today. And because I started that morning drink, I'd keep me a bottle around so I could have a little shot before I'd go out to work. And I finally, what happened is in Guam, I went and got drunk with some British sailors, and they invited me to their ship, and we got on their ship, and we were drinking, and I passed out, and they went to sea. And which is, it's just like, and they get me back, and and it really is kind of a big mess, stowaway on a foreign vessel, and it's I thought they overreacted, but But anyway, they get me back. I get back to Camp Pendleton. They put me in the psych ward, and I escaped, and I attempted suicide. It really wasn't a terrible attempt. I had to squeeze my wrist But, you know, you have to figure you're kind of unhappy to even make a shot at it, you know. And they did a little checking and found out that they had an escaped mental patient. And they decided they'd like to make a deal, and they gave me a general discharge under honorable conditions. I left the Navy and went right straight to Skid Row. I lived in downtown Hollywood. I learned to lie, cheat, and steal on a whole new level. I learned to live on the streets. I learned the difference between selling blood and selling plasma. I was able to stay drunk all the time. Not drunk all the time, but I mean, I was always able to have something to drink. I had a guy come up to me one day and said, maybe these will help, and he handed me a couple of Black Mollies. That was the pharmaceutical amphetamine. And I took 2 of them, and absolutely nothing happened. He'd given me a little packet, and it was a sampler, and so I took 2 more and took those. I thought there wasn't much, and then all of a sudden I was awake. And I just wanted to go out and talk to people, you know. Just you know, walk really fast and visit with people. How you doing? Good to see you. You know, it's been a long time, you know. And that became my favorite thing to do. I like to drink whiskey and take amphetamines and just let the clutch out. And, you know, that's the way I like to live. I learned all about, you know, how to hustle and live on the streets. You know, you stay in all-night theaters when you live like that. And I wasn't yet 21 years old, and I knew all the tricks of the trade. You know, I lived in Missions and lived in all-night theaters. All-night theaters don't stay open all night. All-night theaters at 4:30 in the morning, they close them so they can clean them, and they kick you out, and you've got nowhere to go. So you just walk the streets. And I finally found a way out of Hollywood and hitchhiked across the country and made it back to West Texas and went to work for my dad, who had an electrical business. But my alcoholism was just I was so far gone at 22 years old that, you know, he couldn't have me around because I was drunk most of the time, and I was belligerent, and, you know, he fired me, and I started hanging out over the bar, helping the barmaids. And some guy just really didn't know what else to do. You know, I'm just hanging in the bar. I don't work. I don't do anything, you know, I just drink, and I'm depressed a lot. And some guys came in there one night, and they were, you know, these guys they drove nice cars, and they had guns and girlfriends, and they drank Crown Royal. This was in the days in Texas when it was BYOB, bring your own bottle for you young guys. And, you know, they had the best whiskey, and, you know, everybody stepped aside when they came out, and they only seemed to come out at night. And I liked them. I wanted to be just like them. And they were needing some help, and I interviewed for the job and got it. And pretty soon, you know, I've got a gun, a girlfriend, and I'm drinking Crown Royal, and I got a pocket full of money, and I think, well, I'm a gangster. Everybody's got to be something. And so this is what I do. And so I'm ripping and running and taking what I want, and, you know, I'm thinking life is going to be okay. And all of a sudden, the Texas Rangers show up, and we all get arrested. Everybody goes to prison but me, because I haven't been in trouble before like that. I got probation. And while I was in jail, more than anything else in the world, I really examined myself, and I said, I don't want to live like this. I don't want to be in jail. I'm sorry for everything I did, you know, and I pray really hard. And I believe at the time that I really meant that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to get out and turn my life around. But they told me, and they gave me the probation. They said, if you just do what you're supposed to do for your probation and live down the terms of this thing, it'll be expunged from your record. It'll be a tough lesson, but you'll be able to move on with your life, and you won't have this hanging over you. And I said, I want to do that. I got a job working across the street from my bar. I lasted maybe 3 weeks. And I was pumping gas, and one day I just looked at the guy that was sitting there, and he was smoking a cigar. And, you know, he just bald-headed, and I'm sitting out there pumping his gas, and I thought, this guy's an idiot. He can pump his own gas. And I left that nozzle in his car, and I went into the cash register and made a cash advance. And I went across the street, and I had a drink. And when I came to, man, I was 300 miles away in Dallas, Texas. And I hooked up with some guys, and I started doing the same thing. You know, I'm drinking, ripping, and running, and, you know, they have my dad's place staked out. They have my mom. They're watching my mom. My brothers are ashamed of me. And when I was much younger, I was their protector. I was always much bigger than they were. And, you know, I may not have amounted much in some people's eyes, but to my brother, I was their big brother, and they really loved me. And to my dad, I was his son. And my mom actually, my mother felt like everything was her fault. That if she could just somehow get through to me and get me redirected, that everything would be all right. And so she just abandoned the entire family, emotionally, literally, in place while she focused on me. She was trying her best to figure out how to save me. And I'm just ripping and running. I don't think about anything or anybody. I'm just living for right now. And I got arrested and I got 13 5-year sentences, and I was sent off to the Texas Department of Corrections. And I did my time, and I will tell you that about prison. Prison in the 60s in Texas was, it was a pretty tough place to be. But, you know, it's also, being in prison is very time consuming, you know. And, you know, and you can really learn in about 2 days everything you need to know about being there. You know, it's just, but when I got out, I really wanted to do better. You know, I had big plans. I'm going to get a job, and I'm going to probably, you know, take over my dad's business. And you know, I've got my mom's all excited because I'm talking positive and I'm thinking good. And all I've done is just sit there in prison. And I heard Johnny Harris say this, and I really related to that. He once said that, you know, he went into prison for a 3-year period, and when he came out, he was 3 years sicker than when he went in. And that was true for me. And when I got out, my mom was there to pick me up. And I had told myself that I would never again drink whiskey, except on special occasions. And getting out of prison is a very special occasion. And so I had a little drink of whiskey, and on the way back, I was telling my mom all about my big plans. And she told me, she said, "Danny, what you need is a wife, a kid, a car, a bank account, a job, and a house, and you'll be okay." So I went looking for a woman that had kids, a bank account, a job, a car. And I found her, I married her, and my mother was wrong. That was the worst 2 weeks of my life. And I left that woman, and I was hanging out in downtown Odessa in a I don't know how long period of time gone by, and I met a little old gal that come into my bar, and she was crying, and she's very good looking, and I'm very compassionate. So I went over to talk to her. And as I'm talking to her, I realized that her, you know, she tells me what her problem is that she's pregnant and she can't go home. Her folks won't let her come home as an unwed mother. So we hatched a plan that night. We'll just get married because I don't have a home to go to. She can't go home, and this is a good plan. This is another arrow. It didn't even require a bullseye around that. That's what is that? I shoot an arrow in the air. Where it lands, I know not where. That's mine. But I married that gal, and I called my mom. I said, "Mom, I'm married." And she said, "I know." I said, "I don't know how you could have just did it." And she said, "Oh my God, you have a wife." And I thought, details. I'm always getting tripped up with details. And so I'm just going to tell you, we went on a big, long 400-mile bus ride and wound up at our new home in McAlester, Oklahoma. And my new father-in-law come to pick us up at the bus station, and I was drunk. And he was in a chauffeur-driven limousine, and he took us to his new house, and our new house. And I went upstairs and passed out, and came down and went out on the veranda, and I looked out across this big yard that they had, and I saw it was the McAlester State Penitentiary, and I had married the warden of McAlester State Prison's daughter. I was like, well, what are the chances of this? You know, this is just, I mean, I'm getting tired. And so I absconded. That means to move in a secret way. And, and I got back home, and so it goes. I'll tell you, it just goes on and on. You know, I wind up, I get married again, I go back to prison again. You know, I mean, it's just, there's just no end. It's that squirrel cage, and there's nowhere to get off. There's no right turn. There's no, you don't get a break. And I got out of prison the second time, and I thought, man, I want a decent life. And I went home to Midland, Texas, and I went to work for my dad, and I did pretty good. My dad didn't have much to do with me, but he gave me a job. And I was doing pretty good because I'd get drunk and I'd stay away, And then I'd come in and work for a few days. But I wasn't stealing anything, and I wasn't winding up in the newspapers. And, that was a vast improvement for me. So, to me, it looked like I had turned the corner. I thought I needed a wife. So I married this little old gal I was telling y'all about when I started this story. And I'd met her, she was dancing on top of a table at the Discovery Lounge. And when I saw her, I thought, well, that's my wife right there. And, man, that was a bad mistake. She'd carry out the trash, be gone 3 days. And I'd had a job, and I had to quit that because she was a bartender and she wasn't faithful. And so I'm up there guarding her all day long and then drinking all night long, and pretty soon I can't report to my parole officer because I don't look right, and I've got a few hot checks out, and I've made a few deals, and it just goes downhill, and the first thing you know, I'm back full blown doing everything I've ever done in my life, and I don't even know how it happened. And I remember one day just standing there and saying, what went wrong? I wasn't going to do this. This wasn't going to happen to me again. And I went to a metaphysical bookstore, and I'm in this bookstore like I used to do when I was in the penitentiary. I would read the Bible and metaphysical stuff and do yoga, and I did all this stuff to improve my mind. And then I'm standing here in this bookstore and I'm reading books. I'm reading the last page of every book trying to see, because I don't need any more information. I need an answer right now. And while I was there was a lady that walked up to me, and it was in the winter. It probably must have been November, somewhere in there. And she walked up to me. She was wearing a full-length mink coat, and her name was Fran Hillen. And she walked up to me and she said, she just struck up a conversation, and I felt that shame. I got to get away from her, because she's well heeled, and what do you want? I don't need your charity. That's the way I felt. I had so much pride that I wouldn't let you give me anything. I'd just steal it from you. That's true. It's funny, we can laugh at that, but that's exactly what drives you to do things like that. It's that massive pride that won't let you accept anything from anybody, won't let you be, as you said, teachable. But she came up to me, she said, honey, I know where there's a lot of people that think like you. And, and that was, she was the first person to ever attempt to try to reach me, and I'll always be grateful to her for that. I don't know all the things that happened between there and then, but I know from that first meeting, I started showing up in meetings of Alcoholics Anonymous, sometimes drunk, sometimes sober, but I'm coming. I'm hooked on you guys, and I don't even know why, I came to in the back seat of that car in Austin, Texas, in February the 17th of 1981, and I was as drunk as I'd ever been. I couldn't have walked to the curb. I was in a bad part of town. I had 3 old Milwaukee beers. And I'd leaned out of that car and I puked out blood and bile, and I just said, God, I'd do anything if I could just get sober. And he must have heard me, because sometime that night, 2 guys came from what was then the Suburban group to pick me up. His name was John Henry, and I'll always be grateful to John Henry. But John Henry had picked me up several times. I had been, I was one of those guys I was always getting drunk and calling the club, trying to get the girls to come drink with me or get you to loan me money, I'd be the one that was passed out in the parking lot in his car. And you never turned me into the police. You never told me not to do that. You just, every time I'd come in and I'd want to be sober, you'd say, come on in this house. Come on in this house and have a cup of coffee. And I'm riding back with John Henry, and I sat in that back seat, and I said, John, what am I going to do? He said, oh, Danny, if you don't get drunk, if you don't drink, you won't get drunk. I said, well, how do you do that? And he said, well, don't drink right now. And then when it's right now again, don't drink then either. And that kid chimed in, and he said, yeah, and pretty soon you'll have a minute. And And John Henry said, don't pay any attention to him. He said, the minutes will become hours, and the hours will become days, weeks, months, years. You do this thing. Join us in this thing we do, and you'll have a brand new life. And I'm telling you, drunk in that car with him, I was smitten with a magnificent obsession for sobriety. I wanted to be with you and like you more than anything else in the world. I hadn't taken a single step. I hadn't done a thing right. I didn't deserve squat. But it was offered to me, and I was hooked. I lived out in the parking lot. People would let me stay on their floor for one night. They would, and when they left, I had to go too. They wanted to help, but there was a point that they wanted to keep their stuff too. One guy made a mistake and kept me too long, and I had to return his TV 2 weeks later when I got it out of the pawn shop. But I felt that was kind of honest, because I didn't steal it to keep it. I just pawned it. And John Henry said I had a lot of work to do. But I joined Alcoholics Anonymous, and for the first few months, it was just this, that, and the other. But I got really involved in listening to speaker tapes, and I couldn't work, and I was hiding from everything. I mean, the parole officers looking for me, the police were looking for me. I had warrants out for my arrest. I had hot checks out. My wife is, everything's a mess. I'm in a stolen car. It's kind of hard, and I'm living on donuts and coffee and cigarettes, and I can't understand why I can't get any serenity. But I finally, John Henry convinced me that I might want to take steps, and that's what I did. I got on my knees and I said the third step prayer, and I wrote an inventory. And when I shared that with him, I had one of these wonderful spiritual experiences, and it was just unbelievable. I felt the presence of God so strong, and I felt so free. And I knew I'd never have to drink again. I'm never going to live like that again. And I was so excited, And I got really involved. I was a 12-stepping fool, man. Everybody that I could catch, they went in that car, and if I was bigger than you and you didn't want to get sober, you're going to be sober today. And love and tolerance, that's what some people do. I'm just bigger than you. But I'm excited, and I love this thing, and I'm living underground. But about 6 months into it, I start to implode. And I called John Henry, and I said, John, I'm not going to make it. And he said, meet me at the club. And I met him at the club, and he said, so what's going on? And I told him, I said, I just can't find any peace of mind. And he said, Danny, what's bothering you? He said, it's the things on your 8-step list. He said, the things on your 8-step list are what's standing between you and that power that you experienced, that God that you felt. That's what's between you, and you've got to deal with that. And I said, well, there's some things I didn't tell you. And he said, well, what are they? I said, well, I live in a stolen car. He said, well, you're going to have to give it back. And I said, the other thing is, a little harder, was that there was, in the summer of 1980, and there was a bank robbery in San Angelo. And they got it on videotape, and they're looking for me. They've got a warrant for my arrest. I was in the area. I'm a blackout drinker, and that is my M.O. And he said, well, son, you've got to go in and clean that up. And I said, oh, no, I'm not going in to clean that up. He said, you told me when I agreed to help you that you were willing to go to any length to have this gift. I said, that is theory. This is serious. He said, well, then you might as well get you another sponsor, because you won't make it with that. And I sat out in that car that night, and I just had that despair, that sinking feeling, that what am I going to do? And I just said, God, if you're listening, I don't have the courage. I can't do it. I want to, but if you want me to do it, you're going to have to help me. And almost immediately, I felt this sense of peace, and I had an epiphany, a vision, that 4 walls do not make a prison. A prison is something you carry around on the inside of you. And I really did have the keys to the kingdom. And it was my choice. I could get up and run like I always had, or I could trust God and follow your example and go down there and be willing to surrender my physical freedom in order to have the real freedom that you have. And the next day, I went down there. And I went in to the robbery department and told that guy who I was, and I gave him my AA pitch, told him all about the good work I'd been doing, and because they wanted to know where I'd been. And when it was, you know, he played this little grainy 15-second video, and I watched that as a tall guy going from till to till with a gun and a beard and a cowboy hat, and I watched it and I thought, I just had this sinking feeling like, you know, I wonder what I did with the money, because I'm really going to need it. You know, the second time he played it, he just kind of turned around and looked at me from the side, and he said, you know, the guy I'm looking for wouldn't walk in here. He said, the guy I'm looking for is out there. And he said, we'll find him. He said, but you need to get your skinny butt back in AA. And maybe you can do something about the mess you've created. Now get out of here. And I thought, I'm in AA forever. Yeah. And I'll tell you guys tomorrow, you know, some of the other things that happened immediately following that. But none of the things that you would think happened from a natural order of things would happen. But they didn't happen. Everything that couldn't happen did happen. And I've had a wonderful, wonderful life. I'm going to stop because I don't want to have nothing to say tomorrow. So, but I want to tell you the one thing that I have done consistently since Toronto in 2006, I think, was the first time I ever told the story.
I looked at Bob, and Bob was one of the guys that I would ride around and listen to his talk, listen to his tape in that car, and he was there the first time I told this story, and I had a hard time trying to get right with my dad. He just didn't understand how a son of his could be like that, could do those things. I tried to make amends to him early on, and he just said, son, that's fine. He didn't want to talk about that. You know, he didn't want to hear it. You just sweep it under the rug. And I would ask you guys, you know, what am I going to do? How do I ever get this right? Because there's just like a gulf between us. We're friendly. I'm welcome to come home. But he's over there, and I'm here. And I was the apple of his eye. And as the years go by, you would tell me to just continue to be a good son. You continue to go to meetings of Alcoholics Anonymous. Continue in this thing that we do. And many years into sobriety, in fact, it was close to 20, I walked in to his house because I was back in Midland. I'd had to do some things to reconnect to you, because I had gotten myself in a little trouble. Spiritually, because I wasn't doing the deal, and I had gone back to Midland to make amends to a guy, and I spent the night at my folks' house. I went to a meeting, and when I came back from the meeting, my mom was waiting up on me just like she always used to, you know. And when I walked in the house, I saw her, and I saw my dad in his bedroom. He was laying face up. And he's not this big, tall guy anymore. His time has worn him down, and he's just he's one of the greatest generation, and just a quiet, wonderful man. And I saw him laying in there. I asked Mom, I said, is he asleep? And she said, he's just pretending to be. And I walked into his room, and I looked down at him, and on impulse, I just leaned down and I kissed him on his old bald head. And before I could pull away, he reached up and pulled my head to his bare chest. And he held my head, and he just said, I didn't know what to do. And I said, me neither, Pop. He said, those people in AA, he said, I hope you'll always remember to tell them how much we appreciate what you've done for our family. Because you didn't just give me an opportunity at sobriety, but you you healed my family. You put that thing back together. I learned it in here from somebody that dysfunction doesn't mean broken. You know, dysfunction means that it works, but it's put together wrong. It limps along. You got a family that's dysfunctional. It doesn't know any other way to be. It just, this is the way we roll. And when I got sober and I started doing the things you do, there was one cog that got put into place, and it made the rest of them work better. And I don't take any credit from that. That's the grace of God. That's the power that we found here. My life just gotten so much better. My dad and I became just the best friends, and we just talk and just enjoy each other. And he would just send me letters out of the clear blue, just something to let me know. On one of my birthdays, he wrote me a letter, and he said, "Yes, it's really me," because he never wrote anything. You know, he made my mom do it. You know, that's what, you know how that's it. My mom wrote everything, but he wrote me. He said, "Yes, it's really me," and he said, "I just wanted you to know I really do think about you." He said, "I love all my boys," and he said, "You've been my boy the longest," and he said, "I'm so proud of what's happened in your life." 3 years ago, I got a call, and they said, "You better come because he's in the hospital." And I didn't want to go. I just wasn't going to go. And you guys convinced me to go, and I went up there with my wife, and I was in the hospital room with him when he died. And at one point, he asked me to get him some water, and I got him some water, and coming back, and he asked me for something else, and he said, "You're getting paid back for all that hell you put me through." I said, "Pop, you're going to have to live a lot longer to get even with me." And he said, "Son, there's nothing to get even for." He said, "I couldn't be prouder. I love you." And a little bit later, his jaw went slack, and my mom and my brother and I and my wife were all holding him, and I thought, he's gone, because his eyes were glassy, and I just sat there and stared, and I couldn't believe it. And my mother looked down at him, and she said, "Dan, what are you looking at?" And all of a sudden, he got a light in his eye, and he just leaned up a little bit, and he looked right at her, and he said, "I see a dove." And then he lay back, and he died. And I don't know what he saw, but I know what he said, and I know I was there, and it gave me more peace about here and the hereafter. And when he left, I just felt like I was so thankful that I didn't have to figure out what I was going to say to a God of my understanding about why I didn't take the opportunity that was afforded me for this life. I'm so glad that I was given what you guys have. I don't know why I'm here with you other than to say that there's no one that's ever needed you more than I do. And I love you, and I thank you very much.